This is the usual stream for writing a programming language in Rust. So, where I left things off yesterday, we had implemented catching as error. We had added a bunch of tests. We had done a little bit of back and forth in terms of the implementation, and there's still a bit of work to be done there, I believe. I guess what I need to accept is that the current implementation is functional, if not exactly what I want it to be like. But I've some ideas on how maybe we can piggyback on result in order to support the exception mechanism in the language. But like I say, the current implementation is functional, and we might as well continue on with the rest of the language while we wait for that ideal implementation. And so something I was looking at towards the end of yesterday's session was adding extra context to the runtime error. And I think that's a good place to start today and to focus on for today's session, at least at the start of it. Hopefully we can get a bit more done. But, it's not the end of the world if we can't. And so how this is in theory going to look, well, actually, before I dive right in, what I'm going to do is, and I'll pull up the commands just here as well, just to double check that they're present in the chat. But something that I want to document, at least in my Scratch file, so that it's an easy reference for when I'm going implementing these pieces, is it's not really the context, it's in addition to the context. We're going to have a couple of standard properties in our error objects that we're going to want to populate. And these are going to be predefined in the language, and they're going to be special. Basically, if an error object is thrown, then the operations that work with errors are going to not necessarily expect that these properties are present, but if they are present, they should be typed in a specific way. But then some of them will need to be present. They're going to be required values. So first of those is message, and I guess that's the only piece that's actually going to be required. Originally, that was going to be the error code, but as I was mentioning yesterday, for this language, actually the error message is going to be more important than the error code, because in general, you're going to be allowing errors to propagate more often than you're going to be catching and handling them. So actually the message is more important here. And now that I say that out loud, and now that I think of it, that's kind of the approach that Go takes. Well, yeah, by default, you're really just requiring that the error has an error function that returns a string. So you're focusing on the message. You don't actually have to define a new type for your message, or for your error. You just need to make sure that it has a message associated with it. So either directly or indirectly, that's kind of a similar approach that Go uses in a way. But I would say that this approach that we're taking here is a little more lightweight, because you don't even have to call a function to set the message. It's just, you just give the string. But it's still fairly lightweight in Go. I'm not going to say that it's heavy in Go either. But with that said, we're going to have also stack, which is somewhat required but added automatically. We're going to have, let's see what else. I'll double check my notes. We're going to have sources, which is also required but added automatically. In that, if it's not provided, it'll just be an empty list. We will have, what others? Code. And And stack is also a list. Message is string. Code is an optional string, and function is a required string but added automatically. And actually, I just realized that keycaster isn't turned on right now, so let's go ahead and add that too. Yeah, so I think we have everything that we need here. So yeah, let's go ahead and add context to our language. Now the context block will be pretty free form. And how are we going to structure this? So we're going to structure it. Oh, yeah, so we added these, but we're going to comment them out for now because they're not being used. So we will probably implement I was just checking the implementation of the arrow property. Funny that you have to call the function that's defined with the arrow. Like you can't just do a prop access on it. Yeah, because that means that you can't reflect over it, like do reflection over it. Now, I wasn't necessarily expecting to look at this right now. Oh, sorry, those aren't type props. That is chaining. Where would that be defined? Functions, I guess. So we've type functions and this functions. What other files are? Maybe I'll do a grep for chain in what directory is this? I still need to implement the project search in this instance of NeoVim. So we have features, function combinations. So we've got chaining there. Can we do something like this? Now I presume it's implemented in the way that it's implemented for a specific reason, which is probably to get around language kind of limitations. And yeah, you're not going to do a double chain. And if you wanted to shall we say hard code the essentially binding that's there, like kind of like soft currying, so to speak. Yeah, you're not going to chain it like this, you're going to chain it like that, which is something different. Yeah, so actually maybe it's fine the way it is. So let's get back to what we were actually doing here. So I guess it'll come in the same section as function calls, this addition of context to errors, to error strings. Where are function calls implemented? So that's a call, and that's a call. Oops, now this is going to be a bit of a test. We'll see if this syntax is allowed or if it's going to cause a conflict. I was afraid of that. I guess part of the problem is that we can, if it's optional at the end of an error string, we could have something like if ABC, something like that. And when we get to this token, we're not sure, is it the start of the if block or is it the start of the context for the error variable? And this has gone through a few, shall we say, iterations in my head on how exactly it's going to look. So I haven't really explored this approach too much just yet. So one of the syntaxes that I've been playing around with in my head is to just have a bang at the end of the string. So you'd either have throw message with the context there, you could have throw message on its own, you could have throw message with the error sources and the context there as well. So maybe for the sake of moving progress along and not getting too caught up in the logistics here, maybe we go with that approach. And these are all fairly loosely binding productions, I believe. But I'll double check. Oh no, up here is the most loosely binding. Now this is a, that's the only thing, is this is a prefix. So if we add just a straight suffix approach. So we'll compile this again just to double check that it's working without. But if we add this back here, and we won't worry about what the AST looks like, it's more just to see will the grammar support it. But I don't think this on its own will be allowed either. I think it'll be a conflict. Oh, interesting. So no, we're able to fully support that pretty easily. So maybe we'll make that part of the language. We'll semi-lock it in for now, and we can always adjust later with the exact syntax if I decide that it needs to change later on. But for now, I think this should be fine. So we're going to say that this is, in a way, we're reintroducing the, I think we had an error object type before. So we've raw expression. Yeah, so this is going to be an expression. So it's going to be an error object. Doesn't need to be a new production type. Maybe not. Maybe we can just create an object, and like we did before, it's going to be a syntax sugar for creating an object with specifically defined fields. But before I move on a bit further, I want to check the syntax that's available to me in terms of the rest of the fields that will be going into this type of production. So we're also going to allow an arg list after the bang. I'm going to ignore that for now. Or maybe I don't think it's an error in Rust to have an unused variable unlike Go. Yeah, so it's just a warning, but it actually compiles. So that's what we were most concerned about. I wonder, will we be able to make that whole number of them optional? I can't remember the syntax for that. Yeah, I think it's just to enclose them in braces and have a question mark. So it will be something like sources, question mark. And then we can't have names inside that, so we'd have to do it like that. Nice. The exclamation mark does provide us with a bit of insurance to be very clear that this is a specific type of production and even if, yeah, by trying to make things too simple, it's very easy to introduce conflicts in the grammar. So this is quite useful. It's not props list. Okay, but this one is an issue because if we make the object list optional, it could be the start of an if block, for example. And one way around that could be to say that if we're using bang, if we're using the exclamation mark, then the context is always required. Yeah, and that will be basically what we want. So we're going to move back a bit and say that we're just interested in the context for now. We'll add support for sources shortly, but I want to actually revert this temporarily because I think a lot of the code that we had there would be useful for this as well. Particularly around the syntax, what's it called? Yeah, syntax sugar. So let's start off with I believe it was precedent 6 where we were implementing the actual syntax sugar. That was maybe code location is good. Oh, there we go. Just hadn't reloaded the page. So similar to what we had before, this is just going to that looks a bit funny. Oh, I see. where that's coming from. But anyway, we will implement that where is our production gone? Oh, I stashed it. So I'm currently reverting a commit, and I'm undoing a stash or popping a stash, but I'm not really too concerned about reverting. I want to just have that code. Did it actually pop the stash, or did it prevent me from doing that? I think it might have stopped me from doing it. Yeah, because it was here. Yeah, there's my stashed item. See, I want to abort the revert operation, but I want to keep the changes. Yeah, which is I think what I've done here. Hmm. I don't even have that many changes in the stash. How do I get access to the code that I just started writing, or do I just ignore it and rewrite it, which is a bit of a pain, but I suppose I didn't have too much done already. So I guess this is probably the best way to go about it for now. And instead of those pieces, this time we're going to have message. Does that work? And function isn't going to be part of this just yet. Let's take a look at catches bool because there were some conflicts here, I believe. So I think we can discard some of those. And the function errors. Let's try that. Oh, and root level will need to change to be something like that. Anyway, let's see. In F, error object must be object got a string. Yeah, and that's a bit of a reversion. We're reapplying the idea that the error, well, you're saying before that the error could be a string or an object. The bang syntax allows us to say that it's always an object. So maybe we do that. I don't think it'll be possible to make the braces at the end optional, but I want to try because that would be nice, in my opinion. I don't think that's possible. I mean, I think that's just a long way of adding in the optionality that we had before. Yeah. So to get around that, maybe the easiest thing is to allow both strings and this object notation, even though it'd be nice if we could enforce the object notation or the bang notation, so to speak. But yeah, let's just continue as is. So we have eval expression to error object like we had before. And this user defined error object we're going to change to runtime as well. That's going to give a lot of errors, I think. Is that the issue that I was looking at before where if we update runtime, we have to update that in a lot of places. So this is going to be message anyway. So here we're evaluating an expression to an error object. In other parts of the code, we're just going to create a new error object from a string and a code. So maybe we add in a bit of a helper function for this. And we'll just take the message, which will be a string, and it'll return our error. And that should be sufficient for a lot of the error messages that we're going to have. Oh yeah, we need to update the error variance here. What's the problem there? Oh yeah, just on some matches. I wonder, is there a way of, because we don't really need a separate object here, that's mostly for the sake of rendering the runtime error, so we can do something like this. But maybe Snafu allows us to do something a bit simpler. So what exactly do we want to do? So we want to render or take a reference to the parent item or the variant in general. So that we can pass it to a rendering function. Or even we want to override the display macro. The argument is a formal string, and the arguments of the fields of the variant will be available, and you can call methods on them. Maybe I don't bother with that. So function, first of all, isn't necessary anymore. Maybe I can, yeah, just leave off the display definition for the moment. Well, let's go ahead and update the usages, because if we can't update those, then or that's probably going to suggest one approach over another. I think we'll be able to flatten object into runtime error, but we'll just double check. So let's see, eval mod 1171. So now we're doing it like this. Is that correct? Do we want that to be a regular string? Potentially. That would need to be converted either way. Yeah, we do probably want it to be a language level string. But it does mean that here we'd need to convert it. So we need to go new string maybe. From string. So something like that, I guess. And I guess in here we need to do something like that. Yeah, and that seems to have resolved that one. Or there. And what line is this? 959. Yeah, this part is looking a little funny. But, oh no. Yeah, it's just converting the error object that we have into a language level construct. And yeah, message will be convert to message. So that's basically the way that we want it. Or no, that will need to be done something like that. I'm just thinking, yeah, the language level error object will be converted into, shall we say, a Rust level error object at the time of the throw, and that allows us to make sure that the fields that we're dependent on and interested in are actually present, and so we can have more reliable assertions on those rather than assuming, yeah, like relying on the slightly more flaky language level pieces. So yeah, I just need to remember that when it comes to converting from the language object to the Rust object. So hopefully I'll remember that. 979. Expected a sourced value found a vec of U8, which is a string. So we probably want something like this. Yeah, we'll want to clone that from the original, and then line 900 is another one of these guys. And similar again. And uninlined format args, I wonder will we still get that when we change it like this? Oh, that's just that issue, I guess. For this one, that doesn't look like what the code is. Oh, that's in bind. And both of those are in bind. Okay, and so what are the remaining errors? So source eval error 539, that needs to be removed. Eval bind on line 113. Error is not. Oh, but we're just importing everything from error, which is a bit suspicious. I'm not a big fan of that, but let's just go ahead. And same with line 660. Let's try that. Oh yeah, runtime error needs to be made public. Though we might not need new runtime error if we're, well, no, we probably will, because at the very least wrapping this new string from string function is useful. Octref. I can't remember where that was being used. Was it for the rendering the error object, I believe? And I guess it was for rendering the function part. So we might look at reapplying that again at some stage, but not right now. Though maybe soon. We'll see. So eval error 538. What's wrong here? Expected a vector of 8 of U8, but found a sourced value. Let's take a look. Hi, welcome to the channel. Actually, that should have the copyright notice updated. So we've got new string from string, and that's giving us a sourced value. How is this generally going to be used? It's going to be used to, in the short term, with this render object function, which actually isn't being used anymore anyway right now. Although that display function will be useful even for our tests. So maybe we leave it as is. In terms of a sourced value, so the sourced value is like extra wrapping around the lower level value. So maybe what we do is we just but yeah. So let's see, the field needs to be in the lower level representation, I would say. So whether we want it as, yeah, I don't think we need it as a valref with source. Is there any simpler method that we have for turning it into the format that we want? Maybe we just do value string like that. I'm not sure if value is currently being imported. So this is just a short-term naming to try and get the build running. So this is expecting a vec8. And then on the other side, we're expecting a vec8 as well. So we're really not doing ourselves any favors with that approach. How do I usually... I guess usually the vec8s are coming in from the language in general. So if I want to turn my regular string into a vec8, oh, then I need to do into bytes. So that's probably all I need, actually. Let's try that. No. Maybe I do convert it to a string and maybe I can just do into. So it was saying function ref and value isn't needed anymore. And let's see what our error messages are looking like at the moment without the display on the runtime error. So I think I can reapply render error object on error object. So let's see, what are we getting as a result here? So this is throw two levels, which is the actual output and which is the expected output. So we have unexpected. So there's the original, there's the diff, and there's the actual value. So I guess this is the value we were expecting. So that's kind of the issue with a lot of these new errors. So let's focus on uncaught throws. So if we put a bang here, Or what was the other one? It was the 2 levels one. So now 2 levels is saying what? Unexpected opening parenthesis or opening brace. Did we add in that part of the production yet? No, we didn't. So we would have to do something like this, and then that would probably make it okay. But the message is still not the same as what we were expecting at the moment. Yeah, and that all fixes it. So we'll have, but we do want to allow the string approach as well. So we'll say that throw, if the error object is just a string on its own, then that's going to be allowed as well. So if we have a string here, it'll be S. And it'll just be an error object where the message is that. I guess we'll have to clone it, but we'll just try without first as well. Okay, so we don't actually need to clone it for whatever reason. That's a bit surprising to me, but so let's see. Yeah, I think these are just issues with the message formatting. And I think we don't need to have exception here for the moment. We can just have message, and then we'll add in some extra decoration later on. Cool. And that might mean that everything else is also passing too, which would be nice. Okay, so I think we're more or less there with the errors now. They're kind of keeping, yeah, it's now got new functionality with the error objects, but also allowing strings to be thrown as well. So now next we'll allow actually populating the fields of the error context. So what I'll do is I'll actually update the production so that it takes both an opening brace and a closing brace just to prepare it for the later production, because those are going to be required when bang is provided. Is there a way of getting around that? Not really. No, and I don't think I'm going to overthink it right now either. I think it should be fine for the most part at the moment. And so have I anything else to do for this commit? Not really. I've demonstrated the construction of an error object. Variables can be used directly in the format. Oh, yeah. So that's source eval mod 662. Oh, that's why because they're on separate lines, so they don't spill over the 80 character limit. So with that said and done, have I anything else to do here? I don't think so, but I do want to add in a comment to runtime error to say consider inlining. Yeah, that seemed like too many eyes for some reason. But consider inlining object because we possibly don't need it to be an actual separate thing. It can probably just, the properties of that can be rolled up into runtime. Whew. That was a fairly substantial number of changes. I mean, that took over what, an hour and a quarter almost. So nice amount of work done. Just thinking about this one as well. No, I think that makes sense the way it is. And that one isn't supported anymore. So we'll go ahead and remove that actually. Hi, C Films. Welcome back. I'm doing well. How are you? And so that is reintroduce error objects. And we'll go ahead and push that. Nice. Glad to hear that. So with that done, let's go ahead and start adding more fields to our error context, which is nice. And thanks for the question. So I suppose two main things really. Number one, I've been interested in programming languages in general since I was in college. And so when I was in college, I wanted to just learn as many as I could to find my ideal programming language. And I kind of ended up with two. So Go is my favorite for, well, not necessarily my favorite, but I think it's the most functional for day-to-day programming. And then Rust has my favorite ideas all bundled up into one, though it's a little heavy. So I do it more for projects and things. But I've always been interested in languages, and I've been writing hobby languages since I was in college. But I guess the thing that stopped me from doing a full language was just the use case. I was like, I mostly learned languages in order to understand how compilers work and interpreters work and things like that. But these days, it got to a stage where I was like, well, I know how to write a language, but why should I write a language at that point? And so I left it for a long time in terms of implementations. And then I was kind of thinking of areas where I thought a new programming language could be useful, and one of those is shell scripting. So I think there's still a lot to be done with shell scripting. Bash is probably the most ubiquitous language here, but it can be quite tricky to reason about and work with once you get into any bit of complexity. When it's simple scripts and they're very focused on the happy path and focused on just straight input and output and text processing and things like that, it can be nice, but there are just so many rough edges that it can be tough to work with. And so I think even just having a C style language for that with some of the ergonomics of Bash is useful. The coding language is called Ash. So you can find it at, let me double check. I think it's under links. So you can find it on, oh, there's a new line missing there. And for some reason, one of the, oh, that keeps switching over to my browser. But yeah, one of those links is not formatted correctly. Let me double check that. And let me try this again. Links. Oh, for some reason in Twitch, it's just turning into a run online, but it's GitHub Izanmodo Ash is the Ash is the name of the language, and the project is hosted on GitHub. Ash Ketchum, I mean, it could be. Like, I did watch a lot of Pokemon growing up, but it's more to do with the Ash tree. So somewhat taking inspiration from trees as programming language names such as Elm. I was thinking about, it could be cool to, there's Ruby and Pearl, maybe there's an option to do Diamond or something like that. But I took the approach out because I wrote another more base language called Seed, and the idea then is that I could write other languages from that will be tree named, and Ash has particular relevance to Ireland where I've grown up as well, so that comes into it too. And the language is being written in Rust using the LaLerPop parser generator. And so I think we want to put prop list in here. And what's our best way of doing this? So first of all, we're not going to allow message to be in prop list. But whether we handle that error here or we encode it in some way, I don't think at the moment that I have support for errors in these action blocks. I generally will hand over the error handling to a later step in the processing. Maybe what I can do is I can do a prop item, which is context. And that is going to be, let's see. Yeah, that's going to be props. I guess props location will actually be the opening brace. Learns from the past and looks to the future, McFly. Okay, yeah, clever. Very nice. And how was that? Did you enjoy building it? What was kind of your aim when you were writing that language? And so we'll have context there, and later on when we're actually turning the object into an error object, we're going to cycle through the context. And at this point, we're going to handle errors. This isn't the one I'm looking for, actually. So I'm looking for, error object. And so we're going to want to get context. And if there is no context, then we're not too bothered. Feel like a programmable calculator, so kind of like a physical, like a Casio or something, and actually have a similar feeling to that. What would a coding language designed by me look like? Yeah, that's a really cool idea. And I mean, I think in a way, having something that is more unique like that, like just allowing our creativity to flow and see, okay, from scratch, even imagining there were no other programming languages, what would a programming language built by individuals look like? Because I think we really have gone down to a really narrow space and solution space in terms of programming languages. They're mostly C style languages, they're mostly von Neumann architecture, imperative languages for the most part, but there really is such a rich solution space. I mean, especially when things were getting started off, like languages like Lisp, APL, loads of language, Factor. Well, Factor is relatively recent, but just there's such an interesting space there. And I don't think that it's necessarily the best idea for those all to be used in production settings, so to speak. But I think in terms of understanding languages and what they're capable of and what the possibilities are, I think having more options is definitely really cool, and more creativity in that space. And yeah, programmable calculator for a computer sounds really nice. It sounds like it could be a cool piece to embed into another program. So you could have a game that incorporates it, or you could have, for example, like Google Sheets or other statistical programs that just embed a more sophisticated language. I suppose similar to Wolfram Alpha or something like that, but not that I know anything about those kind of languages. What are they? Array programming and statistics programming languages. But they're a neat space. There's something that I feel like I should know more about, but just never spent the time. So in this case, context is optional. So if it doesn't have the context, then we're not too bothered. But if it does have the context, then we will do something like this. So we'll have a source value, we'll have context value. So this shouldn't really happen. Yeah, because the context property is really just for the space between the parser and the interpreter. It shouldn't be available to anything else. It shouldn't show up in any error messages or anything like that. So I'm thinking we might make it a dev error if it's not present, if something goes wrong here. Now, one thing that we could do here as well is just add a new value into object, a new field into the regular object, or we could create a new error object value type in the AST level. And maybe that makes more sense. And we don't have to worry about errors as much here. We're dealing with a richer type And even though we're getting an error object, a language level error object at the end of it, we have a bit more reliability in the intermediate part. So maybe we'll do that. So thanks for the question. So the variables are dynamically typed in that any variable can use any variable can contain a value of any typed, but the operations in general are going to be strongly typed and generally not overloaded. So that gives you actually quite a lot of type safety, because if the operation, so I think some of the problems with weak typing actually comes from operations just allowing anything. So two very typical languages that have problems with this, in my opinion, are JavaScript and PHP, where they will coalesce things and they'll just say, okay, give me any values of any two types and I'll just make it work. And actually, most of the time, if you, for example, try to add an integer to a string, that's a signal that something went wrong, that there's some misunderstanding either by your language or either by the program or by the developer. And so I think that this will get us actually a lot of safety without the overheads of types. Not that types are, like, I really like types, but in the case of a scripting language, it is a bit of a hassle, and it is a bit, we are focusing on kind of getting it done quickly. It's glue code. It's not going to be really robustly tested because it's oftentimes just gluing different processes together. So actually having a type checking system is a bit of an overhead in this case. But by making sure that operations aren't overloaded as much as possible, and also the other part of it is that, oh, I lost my train of thought. So the operations aren't overloaded, so that'll catch a lot of errors. Oh, and also it's actually, even though it is a scripting language, something that I haven't seen in most scripting languages is for variables to be immutable by default, and not just have mutability be available in the language, but actually having it be the default is something that I really haven't seen in scripting languages. But if it's possible to do it in a low overhead way, which is what I think I've achieved with this language, the idea is that you'll actually get, again, an idea that comes up for me so often and that I think is really important in terms of pragmatism, is getting 80% of the benefit with 20% of the effort. And actually with default immutability, you'll actually get quite, and this non-overloading of operations and strong typing on those operations, I think it's possible to actually get a huge amount of the safety that you would with a fully typed language, but without the overheads of a type system, of verbose language around mutability and things like that. So that's the philosophy of the typing behind this language anyway. But yeah, and it's actually something that I'm quite excited about for this language. I'm excited to see what impact that has on the code that gets written in it. Pretty happy person with PHP. McFly is immutable. Yeah, nice one. And I think that's useful for statistical languages as well. That, yeah, the intermediate steps are, you're better off just building new objects at each step of the computation rather than destroying the earlier ones. And gradual typing. Yeah, gradual typing, I haven't done a lot in it. I mean, the idea of gradual typing, when I first heard about it, seemed very interesting to me. I think the closest that I've used in terms of a gradual typing system is probably TypeScript, and I'll be honest, I haven't been a fan. It's never really, it always seemed like a lot of effort, but without much of the benefits of a strong typing system. But it's also, it's very, I guess the having the option, it depends on the use case, I think. If you have a program that you need to prototype really quickly and you don't want to worry about the type system, and then you want to turn it into a production system that has really strong type assertions, then maybe that's useful. But at the same time, I'm also kind of thinking, well, at that stage, if you're implementing all the types like that, if you're turning a prototype into a full system, do you want to just rewrite it? Hopefully, at that stage, there isn't that much built on it, and a rewrite isn't too cumbersome. But it's I know it's also a space that I haven't done a huge amount of work in. I'm a big fan of my strong type systems, even though this language is dynamically typed. I'm Yeah, I haven't had a huge amount of success personally with gradual typing. Oh, nice. Yeah, and Python has a lot of inspirations for this language as well. Even just in terms of some of the philosophies, like having one obvious way of doing things, I think is a really practical philosophy as well. But this language also is largely inspired by Go too, and Python is such a cornerstone of the inspiration for Go as well. So even indirectly, this language is going to be inspired by that. But yeah, coming back to this, I guess I do want to create an error object AST item. Oops, what happened there? Oh no, I need to do CI brace. So yeah, do I want to like it would be nice to reuse object for this, but practically it probably doesn't make sense. And message is going to be a string, and well, it's going to be an expression. Does it have to be in a box? I guess it does. So our object message. No, white space won't have any special significance in this language. And not just that, I'm hopefully going to do a Golang style formatter where, for the most part, except for line length, even though line length is something that I think is really neat to just be able to forget about. Okay, language, you just handle new lines. I haven't seen any approaches to line length that really justify the approach for me. Usually it's a bit more cumbersome than it's worth. So, but other than that, it's going to be pretty opinionated in how the white space should be structured, but it's not going to be enforced that way either. It's not going to dictate that it's going to have strong opinions and a default formatter that's going to encourage a certain style, but it's not going to be. You're still going to be able to run languages regardless of white space, and it's also going to be more liberal than the likes of Go, which I think takes the absolutely bizarre approach of being opinionated in terms of linting. So it's kind of like, okay, this variable isn't being used, so you can't run your program, which is very funny because I've seen a talk by one of the creators of Go talking about, oh, it's so weird for the likes of Python to be white space sensitive and have syntax impact or white space impact syntax, and what a bizarre decision without really much justification. I think there's actually a lot of reasons why that's beneficial, if not just to make sure that everyone's singing from the same hymn sheet in terms of formatting. But then Go goes ahead and takes the approach that, yeah, if you have an import, it has to be used or else you have to remove it. Whereas it's a functional program, even if that import doesn't get used, so why can't I run it? I'm passionate about it. I wouldn't say I'm very strongly opinionated on it. Like, I have my own thoughts on it. I'm not too fussed either way, as long as there's a nice way of making sure that everyone's on the same page. I prefer for it not to be imposed at the language level, but at the end of the day, it's not that big of a deal either way. But yeah, no, not white space sense, not white space sensitive to summarize. So we've got the error object, we've got the context here, and those are going to be, let's see, those will be context props. And actually, we don't need to call it props because that's implied by the type. So let's try this. So we'll have the message, and then we'll have the props. Do we need the props location? We can leave it out for now. Yeah, this is going to be an error object. Oh, and there's a bunch of places where we need to add in some handling for it. So an error object on its own doesn't really do anything. But we'll just allow it to be evaluated. Okay, so by the time it gets to throw, this is where the object is going to be populated. Is it? Because it could be put into a variable, for example. So actually adding all this extra, no, adding the extra AST type doesn't make sense, because because it's not just going from the lexer to the, and from the parser directly to the interpreter. It's going to be, it could make different passes. It could be an actual object. So no, we'll do it like that. Even though it would have simplified things in a lot of ways, it would probably have made them more complicated in other ways. So you can't write McFly code in blocks, but you can execute multiple lines of code from one file. Yeah, I mean, that seems pretty functional. Again, if it's like going to be an embedded language as well, or like you say, if it's a statistical language, then it doesn't sound like there's going to be a lot of, well, even if there's conditionality, you can encode even if statements and loops and things like that in terms of operators. So yeah, I mean, as long as it's functional, functional in the sense of if it does what you intended to do, then that's the main thing. I mean, I don't think blocks are necessarily, an indispensable thing depending on the context. So props value will get the context, and if the context is an object, then we'll do it like that. And going back to the part that made me think that this would make more sense as its own type, we'll have our dev error. Conditionals and functions end with keyword end, but all other code ends with white space. I'm not really fully sure. Oh, when you say white space by a new line. And yeah, that makes sense. I've updated this language to also terminate with new lines, but it does the kind of Go shortcut where technically the lines end with semicolons. Well, in this language, it's actually an invisible statement end token, but it's inserted automatically with new lines. So we've got context here, and what we're going to want to do next is populate the context based on different predefined fields. Oh, there's another language here that was it Julia is the other language that I'm thinking of investigating for this. Janet. So that's something that a friend told me about lately that I want to take a look at, some kind of a Lisp that can be applied to scripting, which sounds interesting too. So error object properties. So first of all, we have message, and then we'll also have stack. We'll add that next. We'll have code, which is optional. And in general, we'll go through each of the properties actually. So I guess for prop, and it's going to be name and value in props. What are we going to do? Yeah, I mean, having it be easy for people to learn makes a lot of sense. I suppose it depends on the audience as well, because is it going to be easy to learn for programmers, in which case it can often make more sense to just follow what's out there, which is actually what I'm doing for this language. Or if it's going to be for people that don't typically program, then having a syntax that's maybe similar to math or whatever domain they're currently working in can sometimes make sense as well. So let's see if name. So we're going to do a case, no match. So we're going to match name, and it's going to be something like that. So if name matches, let's see. So you can't use the word message or the property name message. So that's going to be a new location error. Something like that. Oof, and I'm doing a bit of a line overrun, so I guess I'll have to do it like that. So this is different actually, because I'm thinking just about the case where we're defining the error object using the syntax sugar, but actually we want to, here we could be getting the error object defined as a regular object. So this is the wrong approach for here, because I'm still thinking in terms of how do I handle errors when this object is defined in the wrong way. So if context, yeah, at this stage, if context contains message, then that's a problem, but I don't really have a good way of handling that here. And I don't want to introduce that here. It's pretty impressive that there are no errors being handled in this file by this point as well. I know that there are a bunch that would be nice to handle here, but are being handled in the interpreter instead. So what is my best bet for here? So should I go back to having an error object AST item? And then with the AST item, converting it into a regular object. And then I handle the errors there. Yeah, that probably makes the most sense. What is Ash coding language like writing in terms of? Yeah, so it's to be honest, it's a very, I would say, typical C style language. Some of the main differences though are so maybe I can open up the features file. So let's see, docs, features. So some of the, or actually even the tests. the features tests file. So you've got kind of your standard JavaScript types, so numbers, in integers, no support for floating types because again, shell language. So if floating point numbers are important, then they can be handled by another language. Strings, lists, and objects. And then like a lot of the objects or a lot of the operations are very similar to what you'd see elsewhere, but with kind of some subtleties in terms of the I guess particularly around mutability and things like that. So your default initialization, where do we define it? Yeah, so our default initialization is the same as Go, where we have a colon equals, but then we add a dollar symbol to make that binding mutable. And then if I take a look at runtime errors here, and we say that, let's see, we try to redefine a variable, then we'll see that X is already defined in the scope. Or if we defined binding X and then we try to either reassign it or something like that, again, we see that it's already defined in the current scope. We can't override mutable bindings or immutable bindings and things like that. Then another bunch of changes are, I suppose, even just having consistency around spread and unspread operations on lists and objects. So you can see here there's quite uniform functionality. Even with, in terms of function calls, you can spread a list to populate the arguments of function calls. So for example, the way we need to have the arguments parameter in JavaScript, that's no longer necessary because we can do a list unspread to capture a variable number of parameters, even though I don't love var args, but it's possible. And other things, yeah, so we can make actual objects and lists mutable because they're immutable by default, and we can make them mutable with, again, this consistent dollar symbol that's used for making things mutable and things like that. The funny thing is, in general, I haven't, like, even though, and this is a nice one, I've seen it in other languages, but I like the syntax here, is this chaining operator where you can make a function look like it's a method syntax, but it's actually defined as a regular function. But the thing is, I still haven't actually really dived into the parts of this language that make it, like, all of these features are designed to be useful for scripting, but I haven't actually implemented the scripting functionality where we can actually just call external programs easily, which is kind of crazy to think about. I've been working on this for a while now, and it's funny that I still haven't hit that spot, but all the other features I think are still very important to that end. So I think doing those in the right way is beneficial for that sake. And so, yeah, no floating numbers because that's not the use case for this language. I mean, there are so many general purpose programming languages at this point that do support complex numbers and floating point integers and all these kind of things. So, if you want to do a heavy or low level number crunching, this isn't the language for that. There are so many languages now, I think, to make another general purpose programming language is kind of, I mean, I wouldn't see a lot of benefit to that unless, the likes of Go and Rust had still really important ideas that made them useful as a next generation of general purpose languages. But for, like, unless you're doing something as disruptive as those languages, I think it's better to find a niche and stick to it and really focus on getting that right rather than being just another language that can do, a bit of everything and doesn't actually do one particular thing very well. So I want to do scripting really well. So, and I do not use floating numbers when I'm doing scripting. Yeah. No, as in there's no support for either floating, fixed, double. There's no decimal points in this language basically. And yeah, if but again, that's if you need that, then you need to use another programming language is kind of the bottom line there. It's a compromise. So let's see. So we want to, yeah, if we have an error object here after all, and we're going to have message is going to be unsigned data types, like unsigned. Well, it's a dynamic language. Like, to be honest, there's basically just integers. And again, if you need more sophisticated U into U long, I mean this language isn't even like it's dynamically typed. So the concept of an unsigned data type is something that a type system is going to impose, but there's no static types here. So the idea of an unsigned item is a language constraint that this language has no way of enforcing. So it's yeah, again, those are concepts for, like, if you need them, you need to use another language. So we'll have message location here. So if you did that kind of a construct, value equals 0.5, I mean, we can try it here. I'll actually stage these changes or stash the changes just for the sake of doing a demo. But basically, it's just going to return an error to say that that's not a value type. But let's double check. It'd be interesting to find out what that would look like. So if I do just check features and I say print, or if I do value is equal to 0.5 and I try to print v, what would I get there? And hi, Aiden Shark, welcome. Oh, did it not stash my changes? I think I'll need to stash those as well. Oh no, that was the changes that I just made. Oh, maybe what's happening is it just is a bit stale, this file. So maybe I'll just do a minor change to it and it'll recompile. Yeah, and so that's the error that would happen if you tried to do v is equal to 0.5. It'll say an unexpected 5 expected an identifier. So basically it sees that dot and thinks that it's a property access. So the idea of 0.5 just isn't representable in this language. So it's yeah, it doesn't even go to 1 or 0 or anything like that, which again, I would consider an error, because if you typed 0.5 and you got 1, then that's not true. So I think it's better to return an error than to return the wrong thing, or to try to do the wrong thing, which is kind of what we were talking about earlier as well in terms of value coercion in other languages. Good. How are you? So getting back to this, we'll take a look at error object. And this is going to have a message, and we're going to have props. And actually, props are going to go into this kind of a structure. But there has been a lot of back and forth with this implementation. The error handling has been quite tricky in terms of like actually just settling on an approach. But I think even with every step backwards, we're still making progress overall, which is good. So we've got message, and that will probably need to be a string, but we'll double check that. Well, no, because it can be any expression, and it'll need to evaluate to a string. So that'll be val mod 513. And if we want to evaluate an error object, then we're going to do a lot of what we were doing in the new error object. No, not new error object. Eval expression to error object functionality. And so at the end, we're basically going to have, so it's going to be constant. You're not really going to be able to modify error objects defined using this syntax. And so initially, we're going to do what? We're going to set some props on it. So in the Yeah, in the way we were doing this before, no. How will we populate these guys? Yeah, do we evaluate them in the same way that we do with a regular? Yeah, so we'll have an eval props function. And that's going to give back a vector of string sourced value pairs. And in the case of regular objects, that's just going to be returned as is. Well, do I return it as a vector or as the B tree map, I guess? So we'll have the result there. That's how I do multi-line returns, isn't it? Oh no, I do it like that. And in the case of this, I will take a list of props. Well, a vec of prop items. And that would basically be as is, but I'll need to expose new location error inside this function, which is a bit of a hassle. Or can I do something else? Can I? Because I would need a closure. I need context and scopes. And let's see what else. Yeah, I'll take a location, I suppose. Oh, let's try that. So once we evaluate props, So we'll eval props, and then we'll go for each we'll check the value for prop in props, and we'll do a match on each prop name. And then if the name is message, then we'll return an error. I think all the other fields, other than sources, but we haven't added in sources. So if message is present in the context, then we will raise an error. Otherwise, we insert name and value, which is a bit of a waste, but I think it's probably the simplest mechanism we have here at the moment. And so this will be return new location error. Let's try that and see where that gets us. So 361. We don't have support for, oh no, that's, yeah, eval mod 361 match raw arg. And that is validate args for a function call. Oh yeah, for, I guess, decomposing them. And we'll just call this an object as well, because, or will we call it an error object? Yeah, I guess we kind of have to. And so we have bind line 87. And that's probably going to be something similar. Those seem like syntax errors. And maybe I don't bother creating a B tree for those. No, I think I will. How do I do an iterator from it though? Oh, it's because it's an arc mutex. Why is it an arc mutex? One 688. Oh, that's something different. So all of this stuff will have been handled elsewhere by this point. So eval expression to error object. Yeah, we'll still do this part. And there'll still be validation in here, but just not the same, not all of the same validation as is in the other one. So it'll make sure that like the messages here. Yeah, so that won't be needed anymore. Message will be validated. Yeah, that should be fine as is for the moment. So error object doesn't need the is mutable field. So eval mod line 1079. Can't be dereferenced. We'll have to see about those ones. I might just need to clone line and column, I'm not sure. I have a feeling that these changes are going to come back. Val error. Oh, I don't need that. Oh, yeah, I think that will need to be like that. And that's going to change a lot of the dereferences that I'd removed before. So 932, where are we now? Oh, this is called something different now. I'll just do a shortcut here with one of the other error values or error variants just to get us over this, just to get towards getting this all building. Yeah, and all of those will need to get reinstated. Yeah, and same with those. And B-tree map. Yeah, I do think I want it because I can reuse it for the regular object definition. It's just that. And now we are going to be inserting message. Okay, we could be close to actually having something working and testable here. And the message we're also going to have to evaluate. So the message we're gonna have to evaluate. Try that. So that's evaluating it to a regular string. Do I want to evaluate it to a regular string and then convert it back? Or where is that being used? Yeah, that'll need to get updated. But let's see. Evaluate expression to a string. Yeah, those are pretty low level items. But I guess that, yeah, that's basically what I want. And then I can, down here, I can do a string value. There's something more relevant came up a minute ago. Yeah, I guess it was this one. It's something like that. So the only issue with that is that we're going from, I think, or a language level string to a Rust level string back to a language level one. So vec U8 to UTF-8 back to U8. And if there's an encoding issue there, then that would be a problem when it doesn't need to be. But I think for the moment, I'll just put a comment there. Mm-hmm. Okay, where are we now? Nice. So we have tests running again, and the existing tests are passing. So let's look at actually using some of this stuff. So uncaught throws, we're not too concerned about. The two areas that I want to look at are number one, the object literals, and we also want catch as errors, even though we can actually test these without without the error literal syntax. So actually, I'm going to add them now, but commit them separately. So let's see. Hey, Dota2 Ash Dude, welcome. And so throw is going to add some fields to that. We'll also want to add the new runtime error. So we're going to also add message here. And the message value will also need to be an error. Well, no, because message on the left-hand side is always going to be a string. And yeah, let's try this as well. So those should both be errors. Yeah, at least with this language anyway, I'm paying a lot of attention. Oh, I'm only running tests on features. And actually, there's a lot of linting that I need to fix. But yeah, I'm trying to be fairly comprehensive with the features, because when I was implementing this before, I was more focused on features and actually designing the language and all the rest of it. And well, there weren't actually as many errors throughout as I had been expecting, but at the same time, the more I implement, the more I'm wanting to actually pay attention to that, especially once it gets beyond just hobby level stuff, which is where I think I'm heading now. I do want to turn this into a production ready language at this point. And so yeah, lots of testing, but it hasn't been too cumbersome. The tests infrastructure is pretty nice. I'm fairly happy with it. So actually adding lots of tests isn't so tedious, and they run very quickly as well. So yeah, it's been okay. So let's see. That is in catch as error. And we're wanting to print that, even though I'm not. No, I'll leave that test out. And then the runtime errors. Let's see. So that's int message error object. That's message must be string got int. And I'll make that a bit more explicit. So we'll say error object message. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, whether it's easy to test in general, yeah, I guess it's possible to write lots of unit tests, I would say, quite easily, because the individual components are all very simple. There's only so many ways to write a very basic if statement, for example. And then once you have all those elements individually tested, composing them together and getting all the different combinations, that's where things can get really tricky. But at the same time, if the basics are implemented in a relatively simple way and tested pretty comprehensively, then in general, the composition of those should work fairly well. But yeah, it's there's still, yeah, an explosion in terms of complexity once you start combining things, for sure. So what was I looking at here? Oh yeah, the message. And what part of the message? Oh yeah, it was actually called message. So let's try that. Yeah, exactly. It's once you get outside of unit tests and you start looking at integration tests, then things start to get very tricky. But even in terms of some levels of integration tests, such as testing, importing, and module systems and things like that, they're still all file system based. You don't really have to go over the network, like you say, and external APIs. So it's a lot more straightforward. You're testing most stuff in memory. So it's generally going to be simpler, easier to reason about, and also, yeah, it's also going to be quicker. Now, again, that's before you get to the likes of concurrency, and testing something like that is a whole other level of complexity. So I haven't quite reached that stage myself. I'm, yeah, not sure am I looking forward to it as such. I do intend to keep it as simple as possible, just so I don't, drive myself crazy. But yeah, most, at least the basics of language implementation are fairly easy to test. And yeah, game code is tricky. I've tried it before as well. I've written games myself and tried to script test for that, but yeah, because you're dealing with clock ticks and user inputs and simulation and things like that, it's surprisingly tricky to get it right. I found it very difficult anyway. Or object context. Context can't contain message. And I missed that. What line was that? That was error line 1 and column 1. But with that in place, now we can start adding some extra properties. I think I have support for multi-line objects in this language. We'll see. So let's go ahead and add this. So some extra error context. And these should all go below. Yeah, and actually that's more or less all the testing that I'm interested in right now for the happy case. We'll add some more tests for some of the additional fields in the next commit. So the function and code fields, or properties rather, will need some extra testing as well. In fact, maybe I'll add that to Scratch. Say that. So next is code and function, but the other error tests. So we've tested the construction of these and throwing errors. We don't really need to test this really, because it is based off of other pieces that have been tested already, but we might as well combine them for completeness. So let's say we'll throw a context object down here. We'll have message my error. And let's just see what those output, and if the output looks basically correct, then we'll just add it ourselves. Oh, interesting. So we have caught an error here. I think both of these are going to be our errors. So we would want, in both of these cases, the same output, which would be AB message. And so I think the part where things are disappearing is in the throw. So on the error object, and catches error is another place where we need to handle things. Maybe we just pass the object as is. I'm not sure. I suppose I will continue on this later, though. This has been a long stream so far. This has been about 3 hours straight. So I think I'm going to park it there for the moment and follow up with, well, we're in a fairly good place. I honestly didn't think it would take this long to add context to errors, but there was a bit of back and forth, and Yeah, I'm not really sure how to explain it other than that. I really didn't think it would be that complex, but yeah, it's close to being done anyway. Once we get this throwing mechanism figured out. So for the most part, I'll probably just be copying the object into the error object that throw takes. I'm not sure. There might be some way we can simplify this as well, but I don't see there being a lot left before we do the next commit. But yeah, pretty crazy to be diving into this much work. But at the same time, this has been really interesting. I've been excited about the features that are being added at the moment and also the upcoming ones. So it's yeah, in a way I've been struggling to keep myself from not working on it. So yeah, thanks to everyone who chatted in. As always, it's great fun to engage with people and chat about this stuff. So thanks very much. Keep checking this out. I'll probably be coming back next weekend. I'll try and stream most weekends if I can, especially with the current set of features that I'm working on. But yeah, with that all said, thanks very much and see you again later. Take care.